I think every child star suffers through this period because you're not the cute and charming child that you were, and you start to grow. And they want to keep you young forever and little forever.
Who's that?
The public.
Mm-hmm.
One of the most famous faces in history slowly became one of the biggest mysteries in entertainment. Michael Jackson's appearance changed so dramatically over the years that it sparked hundreds of headlines, endless speculation, and wild theories. His nose, more than anything else, became the center of that obsession, shifting, shrinking, and transforming in ways that left the world stunned and confused. But the real story goes far beyond what people saw on the surface. Behind those changes were deep childhood insecurities, repeated surgeries, serious health complications, and consequences most fans never fully understood. What looked like a simple cosmetic choice turned into a decades-long battle that exacted a far greater cost than most people realize. Today, we're going to break down the full truth, starting from the very beginning. The first nose surgery. Chapter 1. The first nose surgery, 1979. In early 1979, Michael Jackson was 20 years old and already carrying the pressure of a career that was about to explode. Off the Wall was in motion. The music was sharper, the dancing more demanding, and every rehearsal felt like preparation for something bigger. The world was watching him more closely than ever, even if the full scale of what was coming had not yet arrived. It happened during one of those long, intense dance rehearsals. The room was bright and functional, the kind of space built for repetition rather than comfort. Music played loud. Michael was moving the way he always did, precise, relentless, completely locked into the rhythm. Every step was controlled, every turn was exact. He pushed through the sequence again and again, refining the smallest details. Then the impact came. Accounts differ on the exact movement that caused it, but the result was sudden and brutal. A hard collision, whether against another dancer, a piece of staging, or the floor itself, cracked across his face. The pain was immediate and sharp. Michael staggered. His hands went to his nose as the burning sensation spread. Within moments, the swelling began, and breathing turned heavy and restricted. Blood and pressure filled the space where air should have moved freely. Those who were in this room that day saw the change right away. The rehearsal stopped. Voices dropped. Someone moved toward him while others stood frozen for a second, realizing this was not a minor bump. Michael was clearly in pain, but even in that moment he tried to stay composed. The injury was more than physical for him. For a young man whose entire identity depended on control, of movement, of voice, of the image he was carefully building, a broken nose was a disruption of everything he was trying to perfect. The swelling worsened quickly. Breathing through his nose became difficult. What had started as another demanding rehearsal ended with an injury that would quietly redirect the course of his appearance for decades. Within a short time, the decision was made to operate. The first nose surgery followed, officially explained as a necessary correction for the breathing problem caused by the break. But for those who had watched him that day, who had seen the sudden impact, the way he held his face, and the quiet intensity that followed, it was clear this was not just another injury. It was the moment a much longer and more complicated story began. Not long after the accident, he went under the knife for the first time. Publicly, Michael explained the surgery in practical terms. He said it was necessary to correct the breathing problem caused by the break. On the surface, the explanation made sense. A singer needs clear airflow. A broken nose can obstruct it. Fixing the damage seemed reasonable, but those closest to him sensed something deeper was already at work. To understand that deeper layer, you have to step back into the house where he grew up. Joseph Jackson ran the family with harsh discipline and sharper words. When anger rose, he did not hold back. Michael later spoke about the way his father mocked his appearance, zeroing in on his nose in particular.
I don't think he realizes to this day how scared. Scared. So scared that I would regurgitate.
By the time the 1979 injury occurred, the desire to change what he saw in the mirror may already have been quietly forming. The surgery left him with a noticeably thinner nasal bridge. The difference was visible almost immediately. When Off the Wall finally appeared, the cover showed a more refined, stylized version of Michael, smoother, sharper, more controlled. Fans noticed, the public noticed, and the long fascination with his changing face began in earnest. At the time, it still looked like a single medical decision after an accident. A small adjustment, nothing more, but it was only the beginning of a far more complicated journey. Chapter 2: The Nose Collapse. Years passed, and what had started as one corrective surgery slowly became a longer process of repeated refinement. Each change seemed minor when viewed alone. Together, they steadily weakened the internal structure of the nose until it could no longer support itself the way it once had. Doctors later described the result as internal nasal valve collapse. The cartilage that normally keeps the nasal passages open had been reduced and softened over time. The lower lateral cartilage, which helps hold the nostrils stable during breathing, lost its strength. When Michael inhaled, that weakened structure could bend inward and partially block the airway. For an ordinary person, the problem would have been uncomfortable. For a performer who depended on explosive breath control and relentless physical stamina, it was dangerous. Restricted nasal airflow forces the body to compensate. Mouth breathing becomes more frequent. The throat dries out. The vocal cords and lungs are placed under constant extra strain. During the high-intensity performances Michael was famous for, every breath mattered. When the nose could no longer deliver air efficiently, the entire system had to work harder just to keep up. Michael continued to insist that the procedures had improved his breathing and supported his singing. He presented the surgeries as practical and even beneficial, yet the physical reality described by medical observers told a more troubling story. Behind the carefully shaped exterior was a structure that had lost much of its natural support. The same feature the world obsessed over had become fragile, compromised, and increasingly difficult to maintain. What began in a rehearsal room in 1979 as a response to a broken nose had, over time, turned into something far more unstable. The early impulse to correct and refine had slowly undermined the very foundation it was meant to improve, and the consequences of that process would only grow more severe in the years that followed. Chapter 3: The Vanishing Tip. By the late 1990s, the changes to Michael Jackson's nose had gone so far that the original structure was barely recognizable. Years of procedures had removed significant amounts of cartilage, leaving the tip weakened and unable to hold its natural shape. What had once been a living, flexible part of his face had become fragile, scarred, and increasingly dependent on artificial support. According to reports and accounts from people around him, Michael began relying on a prosthetic piece. The small artificial tip was attached with adhesive and carefully covered with makeup before he appeared in public. Without it, the nose simply did not hold the form the world expected to see. The feature he had spent years refining had reached a point where only an external solution could recreate the look. Music video director Rudy Dolezal later recalled a telling detail from the 1992 Dangerous tour. There were days, he said, when Michael avoided being seen backstage without the prosthetic in place. On those occasions, according to Dolezal, Michael made a quiet, almost matter-of-fact comment that revealed how far things had gone. On those days, he doesn't have a nose. The remark was not dramatic in tone. That was what made it unsettling. It suggested a private reality that the public never fully saw, a face that required careful construction before it could meet the lights, the cameras, and the expectations that had followed him for so long. The vanishing tip was not just another change in appearance. It was evidence that the process had moved past refinement and into reconstruction. And yet, this was still only one part of a much larger physical cost. Long before the prosthetic became necessary, another incident had already set a different kind of damage in motion, one that would affect far more than the shape of his nose. Chapter 4: The Pepsi Accident. On January 27, 1984, Michael Jackson was at the height of the Thriller era. He was filming a Pepsi commercial, performing with the same intensity he brought to every stage. The production involved pyrotechnics, timed to match the energy of the performance. For a brief moment, everything appeared to be going as planned. Then the malfunction happened. A pyrotechnic charge fired too close and too low. In a matter of seconds, flames reached Michael's hair and scalp. The burn was severe, second and third degree damage across parts of his scalp and face. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. What had started as a commercial shoot turned into a medical emergency in full view of the crew. The injuries required serious reconstructive work. Scar tissue had to be addressed. Painful skin graft procedures followed. The visible damage was only the beginning. Beneath the surface, two long-term consequences took root and never fully left him. The first was chronic pain. The burns and the surgeries that followed created ongoing discomfort that prescription painkillers were used to manage. Over time, that medical need hardened into dependence, a struggle Michael would later acknowledge publicly during the dangerous tour period. The second consequence was permanent. The fire and the repeated procedures that came after it damaged hair follicles beyond recovery. Large areas of his scalp could no longer support natural hair growth. From that point forward, custom wigs became a permanent part of his public image. The famous look that millions recognized was carefully maintained with hand-tied lace pieces, medical adhesive, and constant professional attention. After his death, the autopsy confirmed how little natural hair remained beneath. The Pepsi accident lasted only seconds. Its effects lasted the rest of his life. Chronic pain, medication, permanent hair loss, and another layer of physical vulnerability added to a body already undergoing repeated surgical change. What the public saw as a shocking onset disaster was, in reality, the beginning of a medical burden that would quietly shape the years ahead. Chapter 5: The Public Confession. By the late 1980s, the speculation around Michael Jackson's changing face had grown too loud to ignore. Magazines dissected every photograph. Television segments paused on close-ups. Fans argued in letters and early online forums. The nose, the chin, the overall shape of his features, all of it had become public property, and the questions kept multiplying. In 1988, Michael tried to take control of the story himself. He published his autobiography, Moonwalk, and inside its pages he offered a limited, carefully worded explanation. He admitted to 2 nose surgeries and the addition of a cleft in his chin. Then he drew a firm line. "I've had my nose altered twice, and I recently added a cleft to my chin," he wrote, "but that is it, period." The statement was designed to shut the conversation down. By acknowledging only a small number of procedures, Michael presented the changes as minor, intentional, and finished. The chin cleft in particular was framed almost as a stylistic choice, something associated with classic Hollywood looks rather than a radical transformation. He wanted the public to accept the explanation and move on. For a time, the words carried weight. Moonwalk gave him a platform to speak in his own voice, and many readers took the admission at face value. 2 surgeries, a chin cleft, nothing more. The message was clear. The mystery was smaller than the rumors claimed. But the face in the photographs continued to change. As the years advanced, side-by-side comparisons became unavoidable. Earlier images from the late 1970s and early 1980s sat next to later portraits, and the differences were impossible to dismiss. The nose appeared narrower still. The overall structure of the face seemed further refined. Critics and fans alike pointed to shifts that appeared to go beyond the 2 procedures Michael had publicly claimed. The gap between his written statement and the visual evidence widened, and the debate only intensified. Michael's attempt to control the narrative had been strategic, but it could not freeze time. Every new public appearance, every new photograph, every new music video offered fresh material for analysis. The more he tried to close the subject, the more the public leaned in. What he had hoped would be a final word instead became another chapter in an ongoing argument, one that followed him through the rest of his career. The confession in Moonwalk revealed something important. Michael understood the power of the story being told about him, and he wanted to shape it. Yet the body continued its own quieter transformation, and the world refused to look away. Chapter 6: The Skin Change. If the nose had become the most visible symbol of Michael Jackson's changing appearance, the shift in his skin tone became the most misunderstood. For years, large parts of the public assumed the lightening of his complexion was a deliberate attempt to alter his racial identity. The accusations were harsh and persistent. Tabloids framed it as rejection. Commentators treated it as evidence of self-erasure. The truth, when it finally emerged more clearly, was far more complicated and far more medical. Michael had been living with vitiligo, an autoimmune condition in which the body attacks its own pigment-producing cells. Patches of skin lose their color, creating irregular areas of depigmentation. In his case, the condition progressed over time, leaving increasingly visible contrasts across his face, hands, and body. Alongside vitiligo, he was also diagnosed with discoid lupus, a related autoimmune disorder that can cause inflammation, scarring, and heightened sensitivity to light, particularly on the face. In 1993, during his landmark interview with Oprah Winfrey, Michael spoke about the condition publicly. He described the patches of light skin and the way the disease had affected him. The moment was significant. For the first time, a global audience heard him address the change in his own words rather than through layers of rumor. Dermatologist Arnold Klein, who treated him for years, later confirmed diagnoses of both vitiligo and discoid lupus. To manage the uneven appearance, Michael used prescription creams containing hydroquinone under medical guidance. The goal was not to erase his identity, but to reduce the stark contrast between pigmented and depigmented areas, creating a more uniform look. Combined with carefully applied stage makeup, the treatment produced the strikingly pale complexion that became so widely discussed. What many interpreted as a dramatic personal choice was, in significant part, a medical response to an unpredictable autoimmune disease. The full confirmation came after his death. The 2009 autopsy documented depigmentation patterns consistent with vitiligo across his face, chest, abdomen, and arms. The physical evidence aligned with what Michael had described years earlier. The condition had been real, the struggle had been real, and the public conversation around his skin had, for a long time, missed the deeper medical reality. The skin change added another layer of complexity to the story of his appearance. It was not separate from the surgeries or the insecurities that had shaped earlier decisions. It belonged to the same larger pattern, a body under pressure from disease, from repeated medical intervention, and from the relentless scrutiny of a world that watched every shift and demanded an explanation. Vitiligo did not cause the nose procedures, but it deepened the sense that Michael's face and body were sites of ongoing battle, both internal and external. Together, the public confession in Moonwalk and the long struggle with vitiligo reveal a man trying to manage two difficult truths at once. He wanted to limit the narrative around the surgeries. At the same time, he was living with a progressive skin condition that made concealment and control even harder. The result was a face that continued to change, a public that continued to speculate, and a private medical reality that only became fully clear long after the arguments had already hardened into myth. Chapter 7: The Hidden Procedures and the Wigged Secret. While Michael publicly maintained that his cosmetic work had been limited, other voices told a different story. Some medical sources and people connected to his care claimed the list of procedures ran longer than the 2 nose surgeries and chin cleft he had acknowledged. According to these accounts, there had been multiple operations on the nose, along with work on the chin, cheek implants that sharpened the contours of his face, and eyelid surgery that subtly altered the appearance of his eyes. One Beverly Hills surgeon associated with his care was said to have seen him regularly, sometimes as often as every couple of months, suggesting an ongoing process rather than a handful of isolated decisions. Michael strongly denied several of these claims.
You wanting to have a little white boy play you in a Pepsi commercial.
That is so stupid. That's the most ridiculous, horrifying story I've ever heard. It's crazy. I mean, why? Number one, it's my face as a child in the commercial. Me when I was little. Why would I want a white child to play me? I'm a Black American. I'm proud to be a Black American. I am proud of my race. I am proud of who I am. I have a lot of pride in who I am and dignity.
The contradiction between his statements and the reports surrounding him only deepened the public debate. Every new photograph became evidence for one side or the other. The mystery around the full extent of the procedures never fully settled. At the same time, another quieter change was taking place above the face. The 1984 Pepsi accident had already damaged large areas of his scalp. Repeated treatments, surgical inflammation, and the long aftermath of those burns steadily reduced what natural hair remained. Over time, the thinning became severe. To preserve the signature look the world expected, Michael relied on custom-made hand-tied lace-front wigs. These pieces were designed to withstand the sharp movements of his performances. They were secured with medical adhesive and carefully blended into whatever natural hairline was left, so the transition would appear seamless under stage lights and cameras. A dedicated stylist worked almost constantly to maintain them. Every public appearance required preparation. The wigs were known to those closest to him, but Michael worked hard to keep the illusion intact for everyone else. After his death, the autopsy confirmed how little natural hair remained beneath, sparse and patchy across the scalp. The famous image millions recognized had depended in part on careful construction and daily maintenance. The same precision he brought to choreography and music had been applied to the surface of his own appearance, hiding the cumulative cost of injury and intervention. Chapter 8: The Root of Insecurity. To understand why the changes mattered so deeply to him, the story has to return to the beginning, to a crowded house in Gary, Indiana, and a father whose standards were as sharp as his criticism. Joseph Jackson raised 10 children with strict discipline and little room for softness. Rehearsals were constant, mistakes were corrected hard. Michael, the 8th child, absorbed both the drive and the wounds. He later spoke about the way his father targeted his appearance when anger rose. The nose, in particular, became a point of mockery. Those comments did not stay in childhood. They settled into him and shaped the way he looked at his own reflection for decades. In that environment, value was not automatic. It had to be earned through performance. Talent became the currency of acceptance. If he sang well enough, danced well enough, delivered night after night, then he mattered. The stage offered a kind of safety the house did not. On stage, he could control the outcome. Off stage, the old voices were harder to silence. Those early experiences help explain the intensity of his later relationship with his image. The desire to refine, to correct, to reshape what he saw in the mirror did not appear out of nowhere in 1979. It grew from years of feeling that something about him was already being judged. Neverland itself can be read, in part, as an answer to that childhood, a place where he tried to build the wonder and protection he had not fully received. Yet, even there, the old insecurities traveled with him. The surgeries, the wigs, the careful management of every public appearance, all of it sat on top of a deeper foundation. Michael had learned early that his worth was tied to what he could produce and how he appeared while producing it. Changing the face was one way of trying to settle an argument that had started long before fame. The tragedy is that no amount of refinement seemed able to close the distance between the man the world saw and the boy who had once stood under his father's critical gaze, wondering if he would ever be enough as he was. Chapter 9: The Cost of Change and the Pain Behind Fame. By the time the public had spent years arguing over the shape of Michael Jackson's nose, the real cost of the transformation had already climbed far beyond anything visible in photographs. Experts later tried to put a number on it. One British plastic surgeon estimated that Michael had undergone at least 20 cosmetic procedures, with costs around $130,000. Other assessments pushed the figure higher. Reports from the period suggested that a single cluster of facial procedures could run between $40,000 and $50,000, and that was before factoring in the fees of celebrity surgeons, the frequent follow-up visits, and the maintenance work that continued for decades. When injections, fillers, and repeated interventions were added across the years, some estimates placed the lifetime total near $1 million. Money, however, was only the most measurable part of the price. The deeper cost showed itself in 1993. In the middle of the Dangerous World Tour, Michael canceled the remaining dates and released a statement that stunned many of his fans. He admitted he had become dependent on prescription painkillers. The medication, he explained, had originally been prescribed after the reconstructive surgeries on his scalp following the 1984 Pepsi accident. The burns had left him with chronic pain. The surgeries that followed the burns had added more. Over time, the pills stopped being temporary relief and became something he struggled to function without. What emerged was a destructive cycle that few people outside his inner circle fully understood at the time. Surgery created pain. Pain required medication. Medication allowed him to continue, but the underlying damage and the ongoing desire to refine his appearance led to more procedures. Each new intervention carried the risk of more recovery, more discomfort, and more reliance on the drugs that were supposed to manage it. The same body that produced some of the most electrifying performances in modern music was quietly being worn down by the very efforts meant to perfect its surface. Friends and associates later described the toll. Energy became harder to sustain. Breathing issues linked to the weakened nasal structure compounded the strain. The public saw the sequined glove, the precise choreography, the global spectacle. Behind the curtain, the physical foundation was increasingly fragile. The addiction he acknowledged in 1993 did not end the problem. After treatment, the same pattern reportedly returned in different forms. More procedures, more recovery, more medication. The pain that began with a pyrotechnic accident in 1984 never fully left him, and it kept exacting its price long after the headlines about the burns had faded. Chapter 10: The Final Days and Death. On the morning of June 25, 2009, the house in Holmby Hills was quiet. Michael was preparing for what was supposed to be a major return to the stage, the This Is It concerts in London. Rehearsals had been demanding. The pressure was enormous. Around him, the machinery of a comeback was already in motion. Sometime before noon, the situation inside the bedroom changed in an instant. Dr. Conrad Murray, who was on the phone with an acquaintance, realized that Michael was no longer responding. He found him in bed, unresponsive, with no detectable pulse. The peaceful atmosphere of the morning collapsed into panic. Staff members rushed in. Every second became critical. What had been a private residence turned into the center of a desperate medical emergency. Los Angeles Fire Department paramedics arrived after the emergency call placed around 12:21 p.m. They found Michael in cardiac arrest. For roughly 42 minutes inside the home, they performed advanced life support, fighting to restore any sign of life. At one point, the situation looked so dire that they prepared to declare him dead at the scene. Murray insisted that efforts continue and that he be transported to the hospital. The team moved him into the ambulance and raced toward Ronald Reagan UCLA Medical Center, continuing resuscitation the entire way. At the hospital, a team of emergency physicians, cardiologists, and trauma specialists took over. They used every available measure in a final attempt to restart his heart. The efforts continued for hours. Nothing reversed the outcome. At exactly 2:26 p.m. on June 25, 2009, Michael Jackson was pronounced dead. He was 50 years old. The official cause of death, later determined by authorities, was acute propofol intoxication in combination with other sedatives. The manner of death was ruled a homicide, centered on the actions of the physician who had been administering the drugs. The announcement sent a shockwave around the world. Within hours, the news dominated every major outlet. Fans gathered outside the gates of the Holmby Hills home and in public squares across the globe. The man whose face and voice had defined an era was gone, and the final medical details only deepened the sense that the last years of his life had been marked by profound physical vulnerability. The nose, the surgeries, the burns, the painkillers, the fragile structure of a body under constant medical intervention. All of it formed part of the long road that ended in that bedroom on a June morning. The public had spent decades watching the surface change. The final chapter revealed how much of the struggle had remained hidden until it was too late. The story of Michael Jackson's nose was never only about cosmetics. It was a decades-long journey shaped by childhood wounds, repeated surgeries, progressive health complications, and a cost that reached far beyond money or public opinion. Behind one of the most recognizable faces in entertainment history were quiet battles with pain, with identity, with a body that kept demanding more intervention, and with a mind still carrying the criticism of a father who had once mocked the very features the world later obsessed over. What began as a broken nose in a rehearsal room in 1979 grew into something far larger. A cycle of refinement and damage, of public fascination and private suffering. The same drive that produced unmatched artistry also fed an unrelenting dissatisfaction with the face in the mirror. By the end, the physical foundation had become as fragile as the myth that surrounded it. Now the question turns to you. When you look at the full arc of Michael Jackson's transformation, what do you believe carried the greatest weight? The insecurities planted in childhood, the crushing pressure of global fame, or the accumulating health problems that followed the surgeries in the 1984 accident? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear where you land. If these deeper, more detailed stories matter to you, hit the like button and subscribe. There are more conversations like this coming. I'll see you in the next one.